Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the October 14th Urban County Policy Board meeting. Pleasure to have everybody with us today, and we will go ahead and kick off the meeting with some really short introductions. So I am the only one, aside from Michael and Rebecca, in the hearing room this morning. So we'll go ahead and start virtually. If you would identify yourself and your jurisdiction.
Let's start with Jim
Tracy
Hodges.
Coleman. Go ahead.
Jim Hodges, City of Camas.
Thank you,
Tracy
Jim.
Coleman, City of La Center.
Troy McCoy, City of Battleground.
Joe Walsh, City of Washougal.
And that is everyone that we have online at the moment. Don Lee will be visiting later to do a presentation.
Great. Okay, we'll move on to item number 2, which be approval of September 9th, 2024 minutes. If anybody's had a chance to review those, if anybody would be willing to entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any corrections or discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, say aye.
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 And any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Minutes are approved. We will go ahead and move on to item number 3, which are program updates, and I'll go ahead and hand it off to Rebecca.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We have a couple of different things to go over for our program updates this month. The first is a minor update to the Urban County Policy Board application and funding guidelines. You'll hopefully remember last month we did a pretty significant overhaul to this document, and that was all approved. The following week, we were in a conference with HUD, and we had gotten additional guidance on another change that we'd like to make, or that we have made based on HUD's changes. To give a little bit of background, the City of Vancouver has enacted a Section 108 loan using their CDBG funds, and that is going to tie up a lot of their funding for public facility improvements for the next 20 or 25 years. And what that means to applicants to the county is if their public facility is located within the City of Vancouver, our guidance has always been, 1, it has to be proportional to serve people who are in the county versus in the city. And 2, the City of Vancouver had to invest funding into the project. With the city's Section 108 loan and inability to provide funding to public facilities, we wanted to see if there was another way that we could invest in these projects to help our nonprofits and public facilities maintain their ability to operate and function appropriately. So we asked HUD if there was another way that we could invest in another neighboring jurisdiction, and they indicated that yes, we could. We still have to meet the proportionality, so we'd have to show that the Clark County residents are benefiting from the services and the investments we're making within the City of Vancouver, but that the other funds did not have to come from the City of Vancouver. It could come from any other source. So what we've done is updated the Urban County Policy Board application and funding guidelines, Section 4, as you can see on the slide, that states that we can do that investment and that the funds can come from any other source other than county funding. So with that, we've made that update and made sure that that went live for our current round of applications. It's just this one section that has been updated to meet the guidance that HUD has provided. And we wanted to make sure that the board was knowledgeable about the change that we made. The other thing that we have under program updates is at the last meeting, we had a request to have some sort of calendar put together for CDBG and home important dates. So we've gone ahead and put that together, and you should have received that in your packet for the meeting. I also will show it here if I can find where I put it. So I've created I lied. I do not have it up. I apologize. I have a calendar that I put together that is by the program year, and it is starting in July and it goes through June. In that calendar, you will see things that are happening in each of the primary months. These are going to be important dates that are happening when the grants are typically due from HUD, when the CAPER is due, or when we're working on the CAPER, when other reporting is due for HUD, when we release the applications, when they're due from our nonprofit and city providers, when we typically start contracts. I wanted to get all of those things in there, but I wanted to get this draft out to the board. And if there's anything you would like to see additional on this calendar, my plan is that we would give this to you in January when we do the work plan updates, so that you have what the plan is for the Urban County Policy Board for the year, but also what the important dates are for the CDBG and home programs. I've also put on there, there's a line for each month, and below that will indicate if there's a meeting planned in that month for the Urban County Policy Board. So you can kind of be a little bit more prepared on when we may or may not have meetings, since we don't have a really set schedule for the Urban County Policy Board. If there's anything else you would like to see on the calendar, or if you'd like to see a different design or anything like that, this is just a draft to kind of get it out there so that I can meet the request that was sent to us. Let me know, and I'm happy to make any updates to the calendar. Next, I wanted to give a timeliness and grant update to the board. So we have been untimely for the last 3 years. And with that, we have some requirements for HUD. HUD has changed their timeliness requirements and how they do the reporting. And it's all brand new. They're just coming out with it. And we're going to be attending a timeliness workshop on October 17th with HUD headquarters to understand what the requirements are going to be. What we know right now is that we're going to need to resubmit a new report, a narrative report on why we've been untimely, what our plan is to get timely, and then regular reporting after that to show how we are making progress towards meeting timeliness. So we're working on that right now. When I'm working on this plan, what I'm finding is that I don't believe we're going to be timely again in May of 2025, which is going to be our 4th year of being untimely. This is significant because when we look at the timeliness status table that HUD has provided to us, this is when we are going to meet with HUD headquarters staff. It kind of goes above our HUD regional staff to HUD headquarters. There's typically a long wait to get those meetings set up, and there is a risk that we are going to lose CDBG funds because of being untimely for 4 consecutive years. This is something we'll learn more about on at the workshop on October 17th, but we wanted to make sure that the board was aware that we don't know that we're going to make timeliness yet again. When I looked at the spending and the projects that we have open, I kind of put together some charts to show you guys what's kind of happening right now. So this chart is showing the CDBG pending projects by type and year. So I have them in 3 buckets. One is our public facility and neighborhood improvement projects, and we have $1.4 million allocated to projects between from 2020 is our oldest project through 2024. You'll notice on all of these charts that we don't have anything in 2021. All 2021 funds have been spent, so we don't have any pending projects there. So you won't see anything for that year. There's the asset and economic development projects, which we have about $2.8 million allocated to those projects. And then we set aside CDBG funds for our tenant-based rental assistance case management project. So you can see we do note that just so that we can show all of the funding that's been allocated and unspent at this time. The next chart is looking, or two charts are looking at this same information, just in a little bit different focus area. So the chart on the left is the pending projects by program year. So you can see program year, we have program year 2020, we have $129,000 of a pending project. That is one project that is pending that has not been able to start yet. In program year 2022, we have nearly $800,000 in projects that have not move forward. For program year 2023, we have $1.5 million. These we would anticipate to be moving forward right now. And then program year 2024, we have $2.1 million pending. Those are ones that we just allocated earlier this year, and we are still waiting for our grant agreement to even think about moving some of those projects forward. So those are not late. Those would be considered on time. On the right chart, we're looking at the CDBG funds pending projects by status. So what I did was I took all of the projects and I classified them as very late, late, or on time. So very late projects, we have roughly $624,000. These are projects that should have been done at least a year ago and are still pending. We have $1.5 million in projects that are deemed late. These are ones that should be in process or at the end of the process, really finishing up the projects. And then $2.4 million in projects that are on time and should be moving forward in process. And to show this last chart in another way, and to provide a little bit more detail, I created a chart here so you can see what the projects are and where they are when we're focused in on the very late and the late projects. So the very late project from program year 2020 is the Battleground Southeast Clark Avenue. Now this is attached to the Weaver Creek project, so it's understandable why it's late. It should be moving forward fairly quickly in the beginning of next year, but it is a very late project. This is one that because it's tied to Weaver Creek, should have been applied for maybe in 2023 or even 2024. So moving forward, we will be paying closer attention to that in the application stage and telling those projects that they need to hold off and apply at a later time so that we're not tying up funds that and which is causing us to be untimely. Ridgefield G Creek, we are working through the environmental review on this project. It is considered a very late project from back in 2022. It is moving forward slowly, but it is moving forward. The other very late project is the Proud Ground Home Buyer Program. They have been behind. We've talked about them a couple of times over the last few months, but they are moving forward. Their 2022 project, they're closing 2 of 4 houses this month. I actually just got an invoice on Friday for one of those 2 houses. So they are starting to move those projects forward, and we are pressuring them that they need to spend those, get those dollars going. Under the late category, we have our Clark County Homeowner Rehab Program. We are actually down to the last project on that. So even though it says $250,000, it's really down to about $25,000 remaining in that funding year. What we're coming across right now is projects that exceed that $25,000 balance that we have for program year 2022. So we've moved into spending 2023 funds. It's really difficult to do individual homeowner programs crossing program years funding. So we tend to wait until we have a project that is going to meet that $25,000 amount. And then we will get a project and spend out those last funds. We have the Washougal Hamlet Park project. Construction is starting on that. We had the pre-construction conference on September 30th. So that one should be going pretty quickly. We have Battleground Northeast 1st Street. This is going to require an environmental assistant. We are waiting for the report from Battleground to see where they're at in that project. And then I will be engaging them for further conversations about how we move this project forward or don't move it forward and reallocate those funds in this next funding round. Ridgefield Hall and M will also need an environmental assessment, and they have already reached out to me to start the consultation process to move the environmental assessment process forward for that project. The Clark County Homeowner Rehab 2023 funds, as I mentioned, they are just starting to spend those, and that is moving forward. We are seeing significant demand. We'll talk about that later in our presentation about the homeowner rehab program. And we're seeing significantly higher cost for completing these projects. So we've made some changes to the policies and procedures to allow funding a little bit higher on each of those projects. So those funds will be starting to move much quicker. And then finally, again, Proud Grounds Home Buyer Program, their 2023 funds. So we are pressuring them to move those funds forward. That is everything that I have for program updates. I'm happy to answer any questions.
It's a tough chore. But it's yeah, it's important. It's we need to not jeopardize the funding in the future. So we're gonna have some tough conversations on that for sure. Any other comments at all from the board? Okay, that completes item number 3, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, well, let's move on to item 4, then the environmental review process overview.
Yeah, so as I've been talking individually to different jurisdictions and letting them know that, there's significant changes. We've been getting a lot of questions about why they've done previous projects, same type of previous projects, and it was a much lower level of review, and now they're moving to an environmental assessment. And one, I can tell you that I was doing them incorrectly. That is all on me. I've taken more training and found that some of the guidance, I had missed over some of the guidance. And so now we're making sure that we do everything correctly. We anticipate when we have the environmental review monitoring that was postponed from this year, that there will be findings because of the level of review determination being inaccurate. And so we wanted to kind of help understand some of these changes and give the board and especially your public works staff a better understanding of the environmental review process in general. I also want to warn that this is a 2.5-day training that we are provided from HUD that I am putting down in like 20 minutes. So you can see there's very high level and there's just some key points that I really wanted to focus in on as for the board and for the public works staff. And so we're gonna, I know there will be lots of questions and I'm happy to answer those questions. And then it'll be more understandable as we actually work through projects with the different jurisdictions. So the reason why we do environmental reviews, well, one, it's required compliance with the National Environmental National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. This is the umbrella for compliance with other federal laws and authorities, and there's 16 laws and authorities total. Every dollar of federal funds requires a review by law. That includes our administrative dollars. So even the most minor of activities requires some level of review for compliance with NEPA. We also want to avoid and mitigate any harm to the environment and to our clients. So these are all the things that we look at when we are reviewing an entire project. That's why we look at a lot of different components of it. This is also legal documentation that can be subpoenaed. This is proof of compliance and a legal defense. So if we had someone that sued the county based on a project that was funded with CDBG funds that was around environmental factors or harm to people, this would be entered in as documentation and legal evidence that we did our due diligence to mitigate any factors that could come into play. So the environmental reviews are triggered, or they're considered, the federal nexus is the date the project is determined to be federal. So the moment an application comes in for the pre-application process, that is when the federal nexus starts. That is when federal funds are determined to be going into or possibly going into the project. And that means that there are no choice limiting actions that can happen after that moment. And a choice limiting action is anything that changes or limits what any changes to the project to meet the environmental factors. Some of those choice limiting actions are acquiring the property, leasing the property, disposition or demolition on the property, any rehabilitation, repair, construction, any site improvements. Literally touching the dirt is a choice limiting action, even no matter how small, unless it is a part of the environmental review process to maybe do a soil sample or something to that effect. The other big one is committing or spending any funds. It doesn't matter if they're HUD funds, federal funds, or non-HUD local dollars. Any spending of any funds is considered a choice limiting action. So it's really important that when you submit an application that you do not do anything for that project without consultation with county staff. Some of the key HUD regulations that we have to follow are 40 CFR parts 1500 through 1508. These are known as the President's Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ. And those really are folded into the regulations for implementing NEPA, and they're already kind of folded into all of the other regulations that we have to do, specifically 24 CFR part 58. This is the overarching environmental review regulation, so that we go to as a responsible entity to start understanding what is going to be required, what laws we need to look at, what authorities we need to look at, and how we would meet the compliance of doing an environmental review. Part 58 applies to the majority of HUD programs, and specifically home and CDBG, the ones that we work with through this board. They talk about the assumption of NEPA by responsible entities. So Clark County, because we receive the funds from HUD, we are called the responsible entity. And it talks about how we assume the liability of completing the NEPA review. It incorporates the CEQ regulations, those Presidential Council on Environmental Quality regulations. It defines the level of review thresholds that we have to meet, and it gives us the procedures for releasing funds at the end of the environmental review process. As a recipient of HUD funding, we assume that responsibility for the environmental review process, making decisions about the environmental review subject to monitoring by HUD and compliance with the results of the review. So even though we can make a determination and determine what the level of review is, and in previous ones where we know that we did not do it correctly, when we're monitored, that's when we will be notified that we were doing it incorrectly. So we are still subject to HUD's review of the monitoring of the projects, even though we've made a determination on our own. Some of the major laws and authorities that we are responsible to look at, these are all of them, but not all of them apply to every project. Some have only a couple of them, some of them have all of them. So the big ones are 24 CFR 58.5 and 58.6. This area covers historic preservation, flood insurance, floodplain management, Coastal Barrier Resources Act, the Coastal Zone Management Act, sole source aquifers, endangered species, wild and scenic rivers, Clean Air Act, the Farmland Protection Policy Act, environmental justice, and the Wetlands Protection. Under 24 CFR Part 51 and Part 55, we have noise abatement and control, explosive and flammable operations, toxic substances and radioactive materials, and then airport clear zones and accident potential zones. So those are all of the laws and authorities, the 16 of them that we have to touch on for the majority of our projects. When we are determining the level of review for an environmental assessment, we need to look at the project in its aggregate and make sure that we have a clear and descriptive definition of what that project is going to be. So the aggregation, we want to look at all known and reasonably foreseeable activities that need to be included in the project. So Weaver Creek and Southeast Clark Avenue is a really good example. For Weaver Creek to be a functional project for affordable housing, they need access to the site, which is the extension of Southeast Clark Avenue. So Southeast Clark Avenue is happening because of Weaver Creek, and Weaver Creek cannot happen until Southeast Clark Avenue happens. So those two projects come together and it'll be under one environmental assessment. When we are doing the project description, there are many kinds of information that we need to make sure that we include in that description. So here's things that I will work through as I'm putting the description together. We want to know what type of project. Is it acquisition? Are we doing stormwater improvements? Are we installing sidewalks? We want to put that project description in detail. Where is it going to be? How much of whatever is being done, how many lineal feet of sidewalk, that type of thing. We need to have all of that information in there. We need to know who is being benefiting from the project, what the funding sources are, the HUD funds specifically, but also any other local funds, grant dollars, state funds that are going into the project. Who all is working together to create this project? If it's something we're partnering with the state or with the city of Vancouver, for example, what the existing conditions are of the project, and the time frame, how long it's estimated that it will take to do this project for moving into perpetuity, as far as some projects are limited, and we know that they will only be for maybe 10 years before they move on to a different use. So that information would all be included in the project description. The project aggregation, to go a little bit more into detail on that, it can include up to 5 years of activities. We actually just had one of our small cities reach out to see about knowing that a new sidewalk project is going to trigger an environmental assessment. Could we do multiple projects under one environmental assessment? So I did some additional research. So we can, because we can do a project aggregation for up to 5 years worth of activities. The original environmental assessment has to have a complete and accurate project description. So when we do the original environmental assessment for the area, we would need to make sure that projects did not change over time. So what you say you're going to do as far as sidewalk, the length, how much, where they're going to be located cannot change unless we do an addendum to the initial environmental review. So I'm not saying it cannot be changed, but we would then have to do an addendum, which means we have to take a look at the environmental assessment again and then make any adjustments for the changes that are happening. I also want to caution the board that we cannot guarantee that they would get funding each year. So even if we did an environmental assessment, say for 5 years worth of sidewalk projects, we wouldn't be able to guarantee that they would receive that funding each year. They would still have to apply each year through the normal process to get that funding. So the most questions that I've been getting is around the levels of review. So we wanted to give you an overview of what the different levels of review look like. So we have exempt activities, which would be planning, administration, technical assistance and training, and public services. These take less than an hour to complete. This is our administrative funds. This is our business assistance projects. Those all fall under the exempt category. The next level of review is categorical exclusions not subject to 58.5. So those laws and authorities that I had mentioned that fall under 58.5, those would not be subject to the activity. Tenant-based rental assistance is the most common one that falls under this. And then there's also some economic development activities that can fall under that. They still have to complete some of the other laws that are there, but they're usually pretty easy and pretty quick to do. So this can take up to an hour to complete the environmental review for the categorical exclusions not subject to level. I'm going to skip a couple of levels and talk quickly about the environmental impact statement. This is the highest level of a review. This is when an environmental assessment has been done and there is significant environmental impact. These take 1 to 2 years to complete. They are extremely difficult. What you can imagine for the Interstate 5 bridge is an environmental impact statement, and you see how long those take. If a project elevated to an environmental impact statement, we would recommend to not fund that project because there's just too much that has to go into it. It takes too long. But the impact, we wouldn't want to be known for a project that created that kind of impact. The most common level of review that we do for the projects, especially in our neighborhood improvements and public facilities category, are categorical exclusions subject to 58.5. So these are our acquisition projects, repairs, improvements, reconstructions, rehabilitation of public facilities when facilities are in place and will be retained in the same use without change in size or capacity more than 20%. That is very important. Rehab projects and improvement of buildings with little to no increased density and land use isn't changing would fall under this. So you can see that there's some caveats, right? It's very specific in what would fall under this category. These can take up to 75 days to complete depending on what consultations are required, which we don't know until we know what the project description is. But the review results for this, so once we've gone through all of this process, the project may convert to exempt if it meets all the requirements and there's no consultation needed and there's no mitigation required. This is our best case scenario because then we can move forward with the project and we don't need to do anything else. If the project doesn't convert to exempt, but we don't find any significant environmental impact, we then move on to the notice of impact and our request for release of funds process through HUD. This is a 30-day process that happens before we can release funds to, or that HUD will even release funds to us so that we can move forward with the project. This is pretty common with our neighborhood improvement projects. And then the final level review result for a CEST level review is if there is significant environmental impact, if there's mitigation requirements, it could elevate to an environmental assessment. So an environmental assessment can take anywhere from 45 to over 100 days to complete, depending on the consultations required. Again, we don't know what all of those consultations are until we go dig into the project and understand what the description of the project is. It's required if it is not exempt under 58.34 or it's categorically excluded at 58.35. So once we've done the previous assessments for it, we can determine that it might fit under a previous level of review, our lower level of review, and we can move it forward. And if we can't, then we know that it falls under an environmental assessment. Things that always trigger an environmental assessment level review are new construction, any projects that increase the density over the maximum thresholds of a CEST, so that's the 20%, depending on housing, it could be 4 units of residential units. So there's a lot of different caveats that kind of play into that determination there. And then especially that increased capacity of 20% or more, and that is increased size or capacity triggers that 20% triggers an environmental assessment review. This is where we are finding how we previously were putting those projects under a CEST level of review that should have elevated up to an environmental assessment. For example, Camas, when they do their projects, typically include replacing water lines from I think it's a 1/2 inch to a 1 inch line. That is a 200% increase in capacity. And so therefore it triggers over 20%, which I would never have thought, which is why I've never triggered an environmental assessment before, but you can see how that kind of triggers that. If there are existing sidewalks and we're infilling, then we take a look at how many lineal feet of sidewalk are available. And if we're adding more than 20% of new sidewalk, then it will increase it up to an environmental assessment project. So you can see how easily these can trigger an environmental assessment level review, and how easily it was to kind of look over and not do that level of review, not thinking, not realizing that it needed to be done at that level. The environmental assessment, there's a long list of questions and areas that need to be addressed, impacts on public safety, soil. There's, I think, 8 different areas that are really triggered to have discussions. These are more narrative situations with a lot of testing that go along with it to prove the data of what claim you're making for the impacts that may be happening with that project. But it also has to discuss possible alternatives. What if we did it different? What would those different ways, those different alternatives look like? And why we're not moving forward with an alternative. And that could be because there's no other good alternatives. Like this is the best alternative to move the project forward. To review those results, they can trigger a few different things. We can accept the project if it has no significant impact. So that's that finding of no significant impact, and then a request for release of funds, or that FONSI and RROF process. It can be rejected. The project in itself could be rejected because we just realize there's too many mitigated or too many factors that need to be mitigated, and we have unavoidable adverse impacts. Or it could require that environmental impact statement. And again, we would not recommend a project to move forward with our funds in that situation. So once we've done the level of review, we've gone through the entire review process, we come to determining if we need to do a FONSI, an RROF, and then an AUGF process. And all of those terms are on here for you. So first, we need to submit a certified request for release of funds to HUD. This requires a 15-day public comment period following a citizen participation plan process. Our process is to post this on our website. We could also post it in the newspaper. We do a news release through county communications. We post the information on social media posts, and then we send the news release to our stakeholder group, requesting comment on the project. We also need to do a publication of finding of no significant impact. That's the FONSI requirement. We do this in conjunction with the RROF process. It also requires a 15-day public comment period. What comes down to, HUD has very specific language for the RROF publication and the FONSI publication, and we just have to make sure all the correct verbiage is in our public notice to meet the requirements for both of those. After that 15-day process, we submit a request to have HUD give us authorization to use those grant funds, but they also need 15 days for any objections. So there's another 15 days, which is what gives us the 30-day process for requesting funds. After that 15-day process, they send us the authority to be able to use the funds, and then we can move the project forward. So it's kind of a lengthy process to do if we need to do a request for release of funds. So once we're done and the project is moving along, we need to always be aware if there are going to be any substantial changes to the nature, magnitude, or extent of the project. We need to then reevaluate the environmental review, and we may need to resubmit and go through the process again. This could happen if there's new activities that were not anticipated to happen, if we needed to expand the project area, or maybe there's just new circumstances or environmental conditions that happen during the middle of the project. This is part of the reason we do not do environmental reviews too soon in the process. We want to make sure that we have a thoroughly reviewed and designed project before we really undertake the environmental review process, to know that we are ready to move this project, and there will be very few instances that we need to go back and do a reevaluation or an update to the review. And then finally, I wanted to go over some common monitoring findings that happen for doing environmental review. One of the things, it goes back to the choice limiting actions. So spending funds before the environmental review is completed is a big deal. And we could repay the CDBG funds. And if staff are made aware of any funds being spent outside of the design process, then on the actual project itself, then we will need to pull the CDBG funds out of the project. We cannot move forward once we know that funds have been spent on the project. Another monitoring finding is insufficient project description. This is one that HUD really takes seriously, and they provide guidance on how to make sure we include all of the information in the project description. what happens is it leads to a wrong level of review determination. So we're not looking at the capacity of the project, therefore it didn't elevate to an environmental assessment, that type of thing. Or it doesn't incorporate all the related activities. It could be projects where they should have been aggregated into one review, which then again would elevate it to a higher level of review. And so those are kind of complications that can happen if you have an insufficient project description. In general, just doing an incorrect level of review determination for us, pulling things and reviewing them under CEST instead of environmental assessment is fairly common. And that leads to incorrect analysis of the laws and authorities. When you do a CEST level, some of the laws and authorities aren't triggered, where an environmental assessment, it does. And then another common monitoring finding is not completing the notice of impact and request for release of funds process. So what tends to happen is we convert it to exempt where it wouldn't require that process when there was some mitigation required that means that it could not convert to an exempt project, and then the process is not completed. That is a lot of information. It is a very high level look at environmental reviews and the environmental assessment process, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
I've got a few. Nobody else is speaking up here. Oop, did I hear somebody chime in? No? Okay. Couple questions. One, this reminds me why local funds are so important, because they are not so, I mean, it's like they put every barrier possible to actually using them. But couple questions around this. I mean, this is some major stuff, and this is critical not only for the jurisdiction or the organization requesting the funds, but also for the county and for the CDBG program altogether. So first of all, our attendance today, we have a quorum, but it's not full. And we also were hoping to see people from Public Works, which I see we are having some, but some are not here as well. So what I'm wondering is if you could send an email to each of the board members that they can then forward on to their Public Works department so that this information gets through, maybe with a link to the video requesting that they watch it. And then also maybe a separate email, or it could be the same, that relates to timeliness. I think it's important to get that message out to everybody that we are at risk of losing this source of funds if we are not timely. So, and I'm going to pick on Mayor McCoy here, isn't here with Battleground. We just have a couple projects that are delayed, and there's always a good reason for it, but it is also true that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So that, you just have to push. These projects have to be pushed through. So whatever we can do to get any of these projects moving as soon as possible would be excellent. Sorry, McCoy, that was not saying that you guys are doing anything wrong. I was just picking on you as an example. And then the last question I had is, before anybody submits any grant application, do we have any training or documentation that they were required to review?
So we don't have anything that's required. We moved away from mandatory participation in because sometimes it's just not feasible. You don't have staff time to do those. What we have done is we've added questions to the application process, specifically around things that will trigger, to make sure that the agencies can see, like, oh, these are the things we need to know, and let them know that it's going to trigger a higher level review. We have made significant changes to our funding guide, our application guides for the applications themselves, and gone into more detail about other federal requirements, other programmatic requirements, and just provided more detail. It's a much more robust document. And it's meant to be used by both the applicants, but also for the board when you're doing scoring. So you've seen in the past where it would kind of mention like how recommendations for scoring. Well, we've gone and overhauled and really put in more detail. We want the applicants to see what we are wanting the board to look at to score. So there's no reason that an applicant shouldn't be able to get full points on every question because they have the guidance there before them, but that has been significantly overhauled there. And then we are always available for questions. So during the application process, they have to come in writing just so that we can make sure that everyone has access to the same information. Before the applications are open, we talk through projects with the jurisdictions that they come up with ideas and they'll call and contact us and we can talk through, eligibility and what may be part of that. I am hoping that we will be more available moving forward through and be able to provide more technical assistance, knowing that these compliance requirements have been significantly increasing across the board in all of the different programs, different, Section 3 requirements, BABA, things like that. A lot of them are becoming more technical. And so our hope is to be more available to the applicants, to the agencies that have been awarded funds, and applicants thinking about coming in to make sure that we can help them provide a much more knowledgeable response on if they should be coming forward with federal funds. I had one more point, but now the final thing is the biggest thing for this is that this is a significant cost to do this level of review. It primarily falls on the jurisdictions. They're the ones hiring the consultants to do soil samples and consultants to do the design and things like that. There's quite a bit of it that I do myself, but we know and recognize that it falls on the jurisdictions and want them to be prepared for those costs before they apply for the projects. And that way they have a better understanding because those are not things that can be reimbursed through the CDBG program.
Mayor McCoy.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to chime in. I don't think I can, for our public works people, that they're unaware of a lot of these requirements or the processes. I can share with you just a quick story on a sidewalk we're trying to do that recently Ecology told us that since it's next to a mitigation site and we did such a good job on it, that the plant should have our right-of-way area, that land, to be able to grow into. So we need to mitigate our right-of-way that's not in the mitigation area that we're building a sidewalk next to. That's how onerous it's become. And that's something that nobody could have foresaw. This isn't in the CDBG program, but it's very, I think, it's a good example of just how far the overreach, in my opinion, has gone. They're asking us to find somewhere else to get land that has these same 4 plants that aren't rare plants. They don't see them all together very often. And 3 of which we planted in this wetland area to mitigate for other projects, right? So I don't think our public works people are unaware. I don't know that you mentioned national fisheries either. That's one that's huge, and that's what's holding up First Street. We have a project that's been waiting 2 years for National Fisheries Review, GRACE project. We're 18th in line in the state of Washington. So I just wonder if we need to change our process and say we need to be all the way through environmental review and CDBG is last dollar in. I just wonder if we put it on the municipalities to just get all this stuff done and we fund later in the process. I don't know if that's possible, but something along those lines, because honestly, I don't see this getting better. The National Fisheries, I know they've got 2 liaisons here now for WSDOT. But anything that's close to water is going to be problematic for any municipality going forward.
I will say HUD has a direct relationship with NOAA. So if it is a programmatic review, those go quite quickly. They actually have 30 days to respond. If they don't, then we can consider the consultation complete and move forward with the project as long as we've determined that we don't believe there's going to be any impact. The individual consultations, those are the much higher ones that it sounds like what you're having to do for these other projects is those individual consultations. And yes, we've been notified through HUD that it's at least 6 months. So hearing 18 months, I'm not really surprised. There's a special relationship between HUD and NOAA for our projects. So hopefully we won't have to deal with the significant lengths, the 18 months, but it can be easily 6 months just for that consultation. So yes, that is significant.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That probably is something that we need to discuss. Is that something we can require just for the timeliness sake of things? But I would like to, that's probably kind of a more internal conversation to work out between, I don't want to make some blatant rule here that just rules out all the projects because it's not going to be feasible by the jurisdiction. So appreciate some looking into that. Thank you for your comments. Are there any other comments at all? Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to item 5, homeowner rehab program presentation.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce Dawn Lee. She is our program assistant that oversees the eligibility requirements for our homeowner rehab program, and she's going to provide an overview of the project for you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. This is a very general overview of our housing rehabilitation program. The funding is provided through HUD, through our CDBG program under Title I of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, has been amended through 24 CFR Part 570. The financial assistance is provided to low and moderate income households. We use the HUD AMI calculations for Clark County to determine their financial category. We revitalize and preserve existing housing stock. The program is also to encourage long-term residency and aging in place for low-income senior homeowners. We eliminate unhealthy and hazardous conditions so they have a decent, safe, and sanitary living conditions. We eliminate barriers to accessibilities and improve safety for homeowners with disabilities. We also reduce energy cost and usage through energy conservation measures. Homeowners can receive up to $40,000 through a 5-year forgivable loan. The loan ensures the property is maintained and used by an eligible household. If the clients sell or refinance their home within those 5 years, then the loan becomes due and payable. Otherwise, it is forgiven at the end of the term. All work will be performed by licensed contractors, and they have been vetted by the county. The primary goal is to enable individuals to stay in their homes and maintain the affordable housing stock. Next slide. Eligible activities include a variety of repairs. They are completed with focus on health and safety, preserving affordable stock, eliminating barriers for people with disabilities. More common repairs that we see are roofs and gutters, accessibility improvements, bathroom conversions from tubs to walk-ins, plumbing and electrical repairs. Funds cannot be used to cover anything that is under a homeowner's insurance. We do not also cover any additions or detached structures. And costs that have already been incurred by the homeowner, we do not provide any reimbursements for. Next slide. Some of the eligibility requirements for the program: these folks need to live in unincorporated Clark County, such as Battleground, Washougal, Camas, Ridgefield, Yacolt, and the city of Woodland. If they reside in the city of Vancouver, then we refer them to their program and we work closely with the city and make referrals. The applicant must be the homeowner and the resident has to be their primary residence. We do not provide funds for rental units. The households cannot have more than $445,000 in equity from all assets. I see another typo. I apologize. Households must have homeowners insurance and they must be current on property taxes. The homeowner has to have lived in the home for at least 1 year prior to applying for our program. The homeowner cannot have received any assistance through the program before. This is a one-time per household per lifetime. Now, should they move and have a new address, then if they meet the other qualifying criteria, they can apply at that address. Requested repairs have to be within our program guidelines and they have to meet HUD's minimum housing quality standards. The home cannot be listed for sale or short sale or be in the foreclosure process. And we do not provide funding for homes that are provided with reverse mortgages or if they have a balloon payment that's due within 5 years, they're not eligible. The process is the homeowner will contact us and they'll be typically placed on the wait list right now. We determine the preliminary eligibility when they call, make sure they're in the jurisdiction and within the basic income category. Right now, our expected wait time on that list is over 12 months. If repairs are determined to be an emergency need, say they don't have power or their floor is rotted and it's a health issue, then our housing rehab specialist does a site visit to determine their emergency need. And if that's the case, then they are given an application right away to fill out and they are moved to the front of the line. Otherwise, it's a first come, first served basis based on the eligibility date. And within 6 months of expected going to construction, I send them new request for eligibility to make sure they're still within our guidelines. Then the housing rehab specialist will do the first site inspection where he estimates what the repairs can be and make sure that it's under our $40,000 thresholds. And then he comes back to the office, he puts the bid package together, and the contractors are selected for bidding. The homeowner is given a list to choose from. Typically, we've been sending them out to all contractors under a specific category. So if they're looking for a roof, we send it out to all roofers. And then the homeowner does have the final say on which contractor is used for the project. Then once that's selected, we do the loan documents, they get signed, and then the housing rehab specialist oversees the project through completion, including a final walkthrough and any final items to be done. And then the project is closed out. Currently, we have 4 projects in construction, 5 jobs that are in pre-construction, 13 on the approved applicants. That means that they've already submitted an application, but they've been in our queue. And then there are 35 applicants, actually 37. I got 2 new requests over the weekend. So now we have 37 applicants on the wait list waiting for the program. So you can see we are booked out for at least through 2025. And this is just kind of a picture of what we have done in the last 3 years, well, 2 years plus this year. In 2022, we were able to do 8 projects, and those totaled $141,378. In 2023, we had 10 projects, and they totaled $220,000. My apologies for that. And then so far this year, we have $134,119 of funds spent, and that's in those 9 projects that I mentioned to you. We did do the demographic breakdown. So in 2022, you can see we had 2 Hispanic households. We served 1 African American household, and we served 1 American Indian and Native Alaskan household. 3 of the households served were female heads of household. That means female with dependents. 5 households were seniors, and 5 were households with disabilities. In 2023, we served 2 Hispanic households, 1 Asian household, 1 multiracial household. We had 4 female heads of household in 2023. We had 7 senior households and 4 households with disabilities. And so far this year, we have served 2 Hispanic households, 1 Native American Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander. We've had 4 senior households, 3 households with disabilities, and so far none with female heads of household. These are some before and after pictures. This one happens to be a roof repair that we did. You can see on the left the condition of this roof, and then on the right after it was finished with their new roof and gutters. And this one is a handicap ramp that we did, their front porch and facility. It was very difficult for this individual to get out of her home. So then we did the ramp afterwards so she could get out and access appointments better. And her sidewalk, you can see we had to cut back a lot of the shrubbery, and then we extended the ramp out to where she could get in her vehicle. And we do a lot of septics. We work with public health and we have an engineer that we send the specs to. This is a picture of a drain field and the backyard septic tanks before and after. And during the project, this shows the drain field in progress and then the completed project on the right before the lawn was seeded. And that is our housing rehab program in a nutshell. Is there any questions?
Just a quick comment. I think there's real value to this. I mean, keeping people where they're at, and a roof can mean the difference between staying and not staying for somebody. So really appreciate this. And one thing I'll kind of chime in on too, which I was very happy to see, is that there's no special certifications or requirements for who the contractor is, because generally speaking, I see these programs where there's some sort of an incentive, a tax incentive or a grant, and then but the contractor has to be certified, and suddenly certification projects are more expensive than non-certified. So I appreciate that we're keeping it flexible and that just your general contractor can be involved in the project without any special requirements. So thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board? Great. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Sure. Thank you. You guys have a great day. I'll let you get on with the rest of the meeting now.
You too.
Thank you.
All right, we will move to item number 5, which is the 2025 Urban County Policy Board meeting planning.
Yes, so we are looking forward to next year and wanting to start thinking about what types of trainings and discussions that you would like to see with the board. This year we've really brought more conversations and training and discussions about the CDBG and home program and different components of the programs to the board to make sure that the board has a better understanding of all of the things that happen within the CDBG and home programs. So we wanted to open it up to the group to see if there's anything specific that you would like to have us revisit, or new topics that you've seen that you'd like us to bring forth to the board. A few of our planned topics, January through March is always booked for the request for application, and then regular business topics throughout those months. We have the consolidated plan review in May, and actually I think we may want to do that in April, because it's due in May. And so we may want to have a meeting in April instead of May to really get a deeper dive into the new consolidated plan and public comment processes there. But I wanted to give that option to the board. And then we also at our last meeting had a discussion of wanting to understand better the return on investment comparison between the tenant-based rental assistance and multifamily housing project development programs and funding there. So we will start looking into that to have a discussion mid next year for that conversation. One of the topics that we had on our work plan for this year was doing a Section 3 training, and we didn't get to it because we had more pressing conversations come to the table. And so that is one that I would still like to do for the board sometime next year.
Can you remind us what Section 3 training is?
Yeah, so Section 3 is the requirement that a certain percentage of the labor hours be performed by low-income workers, or called Section 3 workers, or targeted Section 3 workers, which has an additional requirement on it, and what reporting is required and things like that. So it's a federal push to have federal funds used to support low-income households in a different way. We've always had Section 3 requirements, but they changed how the program operates a couple of years ago. So some of the jurisdictions have already seen what that looks like in the reporting requirements, but we would like to do an overview for the board, similar to what we've done with the environmental review and BABA and all of those things. So we would have our meetings in January, February, March. I'm proposing, we normally would meet in May when our action plan is due, but I'm proposing we do April instead, so we have better time to incorporate any feedback into the consolidated plan. And then meet again in September and then November.
Any comments? The only thing that I would add is it would be nice to have just a really high level kind of policy conversation, just in general, like what kind of projects we're trying to look for. Instead of just kind of having the application come in and then we just kind of pick and score based on their application, but have some real kind of policy direction in terms of what types of projects we would like to see. I know it may not work out perfectly, but if you don't have something in mind, you can't make direction on that. That would be something I would be interested in having a conversation on.
Yeah, and that will actually fall really right in line with the consolidated plan, as
Okay.
the consolidated plan does
Perfect.
the strategies that we want to work towards and the overall goals for the 5 years. So I think that would be perfect in our April
Perfect.
discussion.
Sounds good. Any other comments? Boy, we're a lively bunch this morning.
Well, and as we know, our work plan for the year is a living document, and we adjust it as needed. There's certain things we bring regularly to the board, the quarterly report reviews, and general program updates. But we definitely want to hear from the board what you want to get out of these meetings, so that we can make sure that we take the time to be thoughtful in how we present the information to you.
Anything else on this item? Okay. All right. Well, we will move forward to open public comment. Is there anybody that would like to make any comment? Okay, we don't have anybody here in person, and Rebecca, it looks like nobody's raising their hand online. So we will go ahead and close public comment. Any last comments from any member of the board for the good of the order? If not, we will go ahead and adjourn, and we'll see you next time in January. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. Good presentations. Thank